Let's talk about feet. I have here a scrap piece that I have cut down and molded to various, so on one side I have the Roman ogee, and on the other side I have a cove with bearing, just to see how they look. And then this fancy scroll cut, I made a math function on a graphing calculator and printed it out, traced it, and then decided that I didn't like it. So I made a different one. So let's look at the process for transferring a picture to the wood, and then we can cut it out once it's been transferred. So let's set this guy to the side, and in order to fully transfer it and have it nice and smooth, if you take a look here at this guy, this has been smoothed over mostly. There are a couple of places where our flush trim bit couldn't reach in my wiggles that I put in there. So we're going to want to make a template also that we're going to put on here for the bearing of the flush trim bit to go along. So we're gonna trace this twice, or you could trace it once and cut this out on the scroll saw and then put it up here and trace it. Either way, but in either case, basic process is going to be the same. So let's get this out of the way, and I'll do the template, at least the transferring for that. So first we have our template here, and you can see my original function, and then this is the new function I'm going to do this time for the table that I'm making full. And on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, well, our feet are only 10 inches, so we need to adjust it, and I want to have the part of the foot that actually touches the floor to be about 1 inch on each end, and nothing in the middle, lest we end up with rocking, because even though our wood is planed, sometimes it warps and we have expansion and contraction, especially here in the shop with fluctuating humidity. So my function comes down and ends, and it's 1 inch in and 1 inch in. And so we're going to need to cut this paper down to size, just make it easier to deal with. Piece. And for your shape of your feet, you can either just draw directly on there, but I like symmetry, so in order to help with symmetry, you get a math function and then you screenshot it. Now in order to transfer this, and what we've done before is you turn it over and you look at the back, get a pencil with a nice wide tip, and you turn your paper into carbon paper or carbon copy paper. So on the email it's just a CC, but with the old style typewriters where you need multiple copies of the same thing, you just have the top sheet, and then on the back of the top sheet is either some ink or essentially some pencil, some carbon, put on the back of it so that it becomes the ink for the next layer. So here's the top layer with the carbon on the back. And what we're also going to want is we're going to want not to start with these points exactly at the bottom. So when we put it over here, we don't want those points at the bottom. I want to start them 1/8 of an inch up, and I also want to make sure that this guy is centered. So I'm going to find the center on here. This should be 10 inches. And you're annoying, so I'll get you out of the way. So we've got here 10 inches, and we're going to find the very center, and that's where we're going to put our 0. So the very center is right there. And 1 inch in is also going to be here, and 1 inch in is going to be here. So we want those guys to be centered and 1 inch in, and then I would like to start, let's see if I can get this back out here. There we go. I would like to start 1/8 of an inch up. So I'm going to set my square here, and we're going to mark this 1/8 of an inch up on this guy. So line down, and then we're going to do the same thing over here, 1/8 of an inch up, and we might as well do it at the center also, because the center is also down to the original height. Alright, now we have our center, and this is going to be the actual feet that touch the ground, and then inside is we're going to have our scroll cut. And what we want to do is we want to have this guy centered here. So we're going to put this on our pencil tip. There we go. Stab through it there, just for that guy, not for the whole thing. Stab through it so that I can get this guy centered and in my hole there. And then I rearrange this and press it down so that these guys agree with each other. Holding that guy still. So making sure that this guy, checking underneath it, is agreeing with the dot. So the dot that I see on top and the dot that I made below. And holding this guy centered so that he agrees. Okay, now holding this down, I can trace on the top. And what I trace on the top is going to be transferred through to the wood underneath because of the pencil markings that I already put on the back side. Alright, so I've got that side traced, and now the other side. Alright, moment of truth. How did we do? Oh, yeah, look at that. So, I have it centered, and then I end on my point there, and I end on my point there. Very good. And I want to make sure that this doesn't wipe off, because that carbon copying is never as good as the original. So I'm going to go over it with my pencil, darken these lines up. Alright, and now I have my stencil traced out, and I can go to the scroll saw and cut this out and smooth it over and make sure that I just follow the lines that I have. Or you can transfer directly to your workpiece, not having done it that way. If you would like to do it, and I think this is easier to deal with than a block, especially with paper. And then once you have this guy and you have him cut out, you can press down a thin piece of wood instead of a paper, and then just trace your cuts. So let's do it that way, see how it goes. Now I've cut out my stencil on the scroll saw, making sure to go straight up to the line but not over the line, never cross lines. And now I have, and I want to make sure that I still have an inch on this side. Yeah, got an inch on that side, got an inch on that side, and this guy's 10 inches long, just like my feet. And now I have my actual foot blank that I've mortised, and it's all ready to accept this. And I can now trace my stencil on here. Now let's go make some cuts. Back at the scroll saw to cut out our fancy feet. We could use the bandsaw, but it's kind of finicky and there's only one of it, whereas we have multiple scroll saws. So with a scroll saw, we can cut a bunch of straight cuts about 1/8 of an inch apart, and then use a chisel to knock them all down. So we're going to cut a whole bunch of times straight into our waist here, almost down to the line, to get this waist out all at once. Alright, now that we have all these relief cuts done, you can either turn and follow your pattern, which on a scroll saw with this deep, you're probably going to break the blade. I managed not to break it by slowing down and feeling the bite of the blade, and as it cleared out the line, then I could push forward a little bit. And you could probably tell I pause and back up just a little bit ever so often when I was pushing too hard, and I could feel the blade starting to bend and pinch. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go use a chisel to knock out the top of this. Now that we've made relief cuts in our feet, we can knock them off, put them up against the bench vise, clamp down, and then we'll be taking our chisel and a hammer and tapping lightly, paying attention to the curve of the template that we use so that we don't go below that and eat into the part of the foot that we want to keep. So bevel side down, and just tap and knock these guys to the side to break them off. And you get a lot of that waste out pretty quickly, and don't have to wait in line for a power tool for this part. Be careful not to split the foot here. And we only need to get this close. Alright, got that side, so we can flip this around and repeat. Light taps, because all we want to do is break off what we've already cut through. So, now that we've got this guy cut down, chopped down anyway, we'll do the other one like this, and then we'll go over to the router table and use our template and a template guide to flush trim the bottom of this so that it is nice and smooth. So I had been planning to just use a flush trim bit for finishing up the detailing here, but it broke on my test piece. So instead, I got out the spindle sander from the back, and we can grind down just the last little bit from the scroll saw and the chisel that it's left behind for these wide areas. And then in the corners here, we've got a bunch of Dremels that we'll use to clean those guys up. And for this whole thing, we're going to make sure that we're keeping this flat on the tabletop and angled slightly towards it, because you don't want to go through on the other side. So let's take a look at doing this. I've done about as much as I can with the spindle sander. So now over here in the corners, I'm going to need to get out my Dremel and touch these guys up before we get round over bits and cove with bearing for the detailing on the top. So we're going to finish sanding this with a Dremel. Alright, now that we're finished with the spindle and done as much as we can, and we've got it down to the line on these big sweeps here, now we're going to go into the corners with our Dremel. And the Dremel sander, we have a slightly bigger drum on that guy and a smaller drum for getting into the corners right up at the edges. And really what we want is right up on the face of it, so that, keep in mind, this is a foot. So when you're looking down, what you're going to see is this profile on the outside. So we really want to clean this up and keep it even right with the lines. And going into the middle here is not quite as important, but we do want to get there to help. We don't want any sharp edges because they're more likely to chip and then crack the whole thing. So we're going to take our Dremel and go in here. And since it has some different settings, depending on how confident you are with it, you can go low, medium, and it's a gradient, or all the way up to high. So low, and I'm going to turn it up a bit. Going up the line here. That looks pretty well smoothed over. Now what we need to do are roundovers for all of this to take away the sharp edges, because sharp edges get chipped and weaken the whole thing, more likely to split everything if you have sharp edges. So we're going to get a roundover bit on the router to do along this guy, as well as the foot that's going to contact the floor. And then for the top, I think I'll do a cove with bearing, cove with bead across the top, because I think that looks better than the Roman OG. So we'll do that next. All right, I've got the cove with bead set up here, and I have it lined up by eye where the bottom of it is right at the tabletop. And I'm going to go around the top with this guy, going from this side to that side, following the arrows. And I don't need a miter gauge for this. So I'm going to take this guy and go straight across, doing the long grains first, and then across the grain. And I have it set up over here where all of this spray is going to go just up against the wall, and then I've got my vacuum here where I can take care of it. The bit with a roundover bit to get these guys as well as all these corners here. Alright, I want to lower this so just the roundover is going to be used and not the straight cutting edge. unclamp, lower it, reclamp. All right, and then once again, we're going from right to left. And I'm going to do all of these corner edges, round them all over. Alright, now this very top here still has a sharp edge from that cove with bead, so I'm going to take a 1/8 bit, 1/8 inch roundover bit, and just hit this very top edge to soften that and also deal with that little bit of tear out there. So, remove this bit, and here we have our foot profiled and detailed on the top, ready to put our table on top of. Let's go see what that looks like.